Family is one of the most extensively used words. It is a central topic in books, television, theater, and film. Friends and colleagues talk about their families, and it is a significant point of reference in public policy, immigration laws, and family values. In 1869, Harriet Beecher Stowe and her sister Catherine Beecher wrote a book called The American Woman's Home. Their book began by asking, what then is the end design by the family state? For the Beechers, the makeup of the family state was obvious. There was a stronger and wiser father who works hard and practices frugality to provide a home, and there's a mother who becomes a selfless worker to train the inmates, who are the children. According to the Beecher sisters, this family is resolutely Christian. The Beecher sisters' definition submits some key words. Kinship, blood, and lineage, meaning people who make up a family are bound through kinship and biologically related by blood. The title of their book conjures family, which brings to mind the modifying term domestic. The content of the book differentiates between outdoor, where the father works, and domestic home, a physical and emotionally charged space that is realized because of his efforts. Family invites the addition of words like patriarchy, property, woman, and reproduction. The man of the family purchases and controls the property, while the woman ensures its organized conduction in both the form of worth and blood. In the 1970s, Raymond Williams said not only the reality, but also the image of the nuclear traditional family were mere inventions of the 19th century. He also said that the word has a splendidly varied history. It derives from the Latin familis, which means servant, and familia, which means household. The early English meaning of family was that of household, in the sense that a group of blood relations and servants could live together in one house. By expansion, the term familiar became to signify feelings of friendship and affection that comes from the experience of people living together in a household. The definition of family functions with ideological purposes and often oppose the historical realities. Contrary to the Beecher sisters' assertion, family is not a state, but instead a flexible process. The implications of family range from an unlimited social practice that involves certain people and spaces to a larger notion of feeling and experience, and finally, symbolism. But each definition limits the strictures of family. The family is seen as an organization of inclusion that has the right to exclude those not related by blood or descended from a common ancestor, not living under the same roof and not belonging to the same class or race. The categories of inclusion and exclusion are often reshaped as norm and deviance. They resonate in talks of family values that define social, religious, and sexual norms that begin and maintain a family. Or there is gay marriage that is deemed deviant to its sexual practices that prohibit having children naturally, which in turn threatens legitimate families. Family, it turns out, is not at all a private affair, but a very public one. In the 70s and 80s, there were feminist researchers that were beginning the critical process of uncovering the middle-class family as an invention. They looked at topics such as gender, slavery, sentimentality, and nationhood as a means to track the progress of the family from the colonial period forward. In earlier time periods, domestic home and workplace fashioned a single financial unit within the household, and all members contributed to the sustenance. By the early 19th century, work became more and more separated from the home as fathers participated in outdoor labor, and the domestic work of mothers became privatized. The division of labor brought about the ideology of separate domains. Authors like the Beecher sisters accepted the separate domains dichotomy. However, feminist thinkers criticized it as a masculine system of sexual and property relations that support state interests. The father alone is permitted property. This includes wife and children, and the wife herself is property and is refused the power of ownership. Feminists such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton pursued legal equality, and later feminist theories have cleverly pointed out that legal intervention often results in intrusion that trespasses on the right to privacy, especially when it comes to women's reproductive rights. If the 19th century bourgeois family was built as the norm, then what of the other forms of family? The definition of family often serves as a code word that is intended to brand the deviant. Analysis of alternative family structures confuses the antagonism between norm and deviance by pushing a shift from an either-or to a both-and standard. In doing this, it opposes conventional systems of organization and assessment. The history of African American families brings several examples. Defining slaves as property meant that the law of the United States denied them the right to create families. It discarded both the legality of slave marriage and the validity of the children. Slave owners refused to acknowledge that slaves could experience feelings of intimacy for each other, which allowed them to justify the separation of slave families, which caused the African Americans to form families that were extended kin families that were adapted from African culture. In her 1861 book, Harriet Jacobs describes her childhood family as including a brother, an uncle, and a grandmother. Her family both followed and contradicted the bourgeois family's prearranged gender roles. Her uncle was a nurturer. Her grandmother was the economic provider who firmly maintained the cult of true womanhood. But if her loyalty to true womanhood is normative, then her application of it to the slave woman is deviant. On the other hand, if her male role as primary provider appears to be deviant, her goal of being able to purchase enslaved family members is normative. The post-Civil War era established the legality of black marriage and family. It was a radical social event and acknowledged their ability to form familial bonds and granted them the ability to acquire and transfer property. Many African American authors of the time period began to try to untangle what Jacobs called the tangled skeins of slave genealogies by rebuilding family lineages. In their quest, these writers followed a normative impulse in reorganizing the family as bourgeois and patriarchal, and emphasizing lineage and legacy, which could be seen as deviant when applied to African Americans. This culminated in diminishing the differences between whites and blacks and provided to be a formidable threat to the norms of white supremacy. Family Limitation was a 1914 book written by social reformer Margaret Sanger. Sanger promoted birth control as a means of alleviating women who were encumbered with children. Her organizations eventually evolved into Planned Parenthood. While her initial thoughts were to help women, she eventually came to visualize birth control as a tool of eugenics. Sanger meant to guarantee that the unfit, by which she meant poor immigrants and African Americans, would not reproduce. A little more than 50 years later, in the 1960s, ignoring both past and present social history, Daniel Patrick Moynihan published a report that relegated the African American family to a single structure, the female-headed household. He classified it as a tangle of pathology, which was an eerie echo of Harriet Jacobs' tangled skein. The notion of household returns us to familia, a physical and emotional familiarity bringing non-related people together under one roof, although in a far more complex structure than the term indicates. U.S. history is rich in examples that defy binaristic thinking. In the antebellum period, the defenders of the slave system in the South envisioned the plantation as a family, that the slave owner was viewed as the benevolent patriarch of those he tormented. In the North, managers of the Lowell mills looked at their workplace as a family that was intended to protect the working girls. This family, however, deliberately omitted those who were racially different, and the patriarchal structure left the girls without protection. In cities, boarding houses assembled individuals who were not blood relatives that bonded to form households that were resistant to the pressures of city life. The late 1800s gave rise to settlement houses. Pictured to the left is Hull House, which was possibly the most famous settlement house. It was in Chicago and was established by Jane Addams. Settlement houses provided educational, recreational, and other services to inner-city communities. The women who were seeking alternatives to marriage and family life came to the inner city to provide a social gathering place and services to the poor, all while creating a different family structure for themselves. Family becomes a metaphor for humankind and functions as a mean to contest who is familiar and who is a stranger, and what is normal versus what is deviant. It has been noted that authors of the 1800s often toss the nation in familial terms as an extension of the bourgeois family home. Its members are kin and not only belong to the same lineage, but they share the same blood. From a highly idealized viewpoint, post-war authors imagine the Reconstruction as a romantic reunion between the masculine North and feminine South, which fashioned a new nation that still continued to exclude minority groups. In 1892, Black author Anna Julia Cooper cleverly represented the country as a family fight between Big Brother, the North, and a stubborn and spoiled little sister, the South, which ends the possibility of marriage and kids unless there is an incestuous union. In the most expansive symbolic appearance of the family of man, 19th century quasi-scientific theories of many beginnings argued for the separate design of races in conflict to the Christian concept of humanity's shared origin. Acts 17:26 says, "From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands." The aftermath of the world wars, plus social and economic turmoils, has caused the United States to experience the propagation of families that are indifferent to the traditional concepts of blood, nuclear structure, and heredity. This includes communal households, blended families that form through a divorce, families that are created by adoption, artificial insemination, or surrogate mothering for infertile heterosexual couples or gay couples, and single parents. To the social conservatives, those families signify the failure of traditional norms and emphasize their failure to eliminate deviance from the domestic family. They have protested in various ways, such as urging school boards to pull books such as Heather Has Two Mommies from school libraries and persuading family courts to favor adoptive families over surrogate moms. Sociologists like Judith Stacy look at these brave new families as the result of resourceful and creative action. Postmodern familias look back to Williams' pre-modern familia. We are systematically moving back to the future in a crusade that demands exploration by American cultural theorists and the public policy makers alike.